So in Rome, okay, we had a long period where in the Roman Catholic Church in the West, the 20th century, where they tended early on to reject ecumenism and syncretism and charismaticism, and those things all go together, and that's not accidental, because they're all part of the same heresy. And so this idea that we can have this generic monotheism based on generic ideas, right? And we can, the Jew and the Hindu, or well, I guess you could throw the Hindu in there because some of them are monotheists. If you believe that the all or the absolute is everything, I guess then everything's God, then there's only one God, right? But ultimately that's just gobbledygook, because then if everything is God, then nothing's God. So the idea that Judaism and Christianity and Islam are all united in the idea of the same God is just simply not true, because of the Orthodox teaching that the Logos is who created the world. So the Jewish theology and Islamic theology do not teach that. They do not teach an ex nihilo creation by the Son of God. So you're talking about a different God. Now, why did they come to that conclusion? Well, I can tell you that when you read the horrible apologetic work known as the Summa Contra Gentiles of Thomas Aquinas, the entire first volume of that Summa is dedicated to doing apologetics on the basis of the idea of generic theism. But you see, there's no such thing as generic theism. There's no generic idea of God, quote unquote, that everyone shares, that is a starting point for philosophy or for theology. The only God that exists is the God of the Bible, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who's a personal God. And that personal God is the God who promised a Messiah who would be his own son, the triune God, you see. And that's why Orthodox theology and tradition has the, quote, Old Testament saints as icons, right? I bought an icon of Daniel because I love the book of Daniel when I was at the shrine of St. Photius in Florida, because I know that Orthodox theology doesn't teach that there is a Masonic generic theism known as little g God that all the religions share. That's just simply not true. Now, yeah, there are some fuzzy aspects of things, because in a sense, like say when an Islamic person, for example, speaks of Allah. Now, if you go to the Orthodox liturgy in Arabic, it also uses Allah. But that does not mean that the Orthodox person and the Muslim are both worshiping the same deity, because they have radically different views of what that deity is and who he does, what he does. The Orthodox view is that God is distinct from his operations, essence, energy distinction, and that he's personal, and that you can know him principally through the Logos, the Son of God. Islamic theology teaches that you don't have a personal relationship with God based on love and theosis. You have a master-slave relationship to God. And you just simply obey because you're supposed to. And you don't literally commune with that deity. You don't participate in his deifying life, light, and energies. Because it's not really ultimately possible to talk about that God as, quote, personal, because that would be a kind of idolatry. So, like Judaism, Islam believes in absolute divine simplicity, which makes God ultimately unknowable, untouchable, and unreachable, and ultimately leads to atheism. And so Islam, as St. John of Damascus says, is a heresy. And it might more properly be called a heresy, precisely because it does try to have some view of Christ, which is kind of Nestorian, basically. So Islam is a kind of Nestorian mix with Christianity and Judaism. It's like Nestorian so-called Christianity mixed with Judaism. And for Orthodox theology, those are heresies. So there's no generic deity any more than Orthodox Christians are united with Jehovah's Witnesses. I mean, give me a break. Any more than Orthodoxy is united with Mormonism or Scientology. Okay. So all errors on God hinge, we believe, on those basic points that I mentioned. Number one, absolute reality is personal. God's personal. Man's made in his image as the image of a personal God. And the God that we're speaking of here is never ever revealed as generic godness, generic theism. None of that Thomistic gobbledygook. Get it out of here. Only revealed as the personal I am covenantal God from the nation of Israel. That's the only true God, who is now taught in the nation of Israel that is spread throughout the world, called the Orthodox Church. That is the true vine. If you read Romans 11, that's what St. Paul teaches. There's no other traditions or sources by which you get access to this vine. Now, there might be aspects of this tradition elsewhere out there, but by the way, the Quran proponents, every Muslim that I've had debates with, and I just had a few fierce ones in the last few weeks, they don't know anything about the Bible. They're completely ignorant about the Bible, and you're talking to a brick wall when you're trying to speak of, like if you try to explain the book of Hebrews or something like that to somebody who's Islamic in their beliefs, they have no idea what you're talking about. You're wasting your time. You're not going to get anywhere. They don't know what the temple was about. They don't know what's in Genesis. They don't know what symbology and typology is. They don't understand Christ as the new high priest. They don't know any of that. So you got to start kind of more fundamental and try to say, well, what's your philosophy of God? But then most of those people, they don't care about philosophy. They don't know anything about it. You're, again, talking to a brick wall. So it's very difficult. It's almost like a cult. Like the experience that I've had is very similar to cults, where it's like you can't look. If I say, hey, let's look at these prophecies in Daniel and how later Jesus comes and fulfills them. Look at the promises of the covenant, all the successive covenants in the Old Testament, and how they're fulfilled in the prophet, priest, king, great high priest character of Jesus. Like, they don't know what you're talking about. So I don't know. It's very difficult. I have to figure out how to actually have dialogue and conversation with Islamic persons. And when I say dialogue and conversation, I'm talking about apologetics. I'm not talking about UN, ecumenist, relativism, syncretism, gobbledygook, apostasy. Now, one of the ways that and by the way, to show that that's all true, there's a great point made that you can't just talk about the Abrahamic covenant as if, we'll talk to the Jewish person and we'll talk to the Islamic person because of the Abrahamic covenant, because of monotheism, when Paul says in Galatians the only access to the Abrahamic covenant is in Christ, right? This is Galatians 3. So no pagan gods, right? So this is all just based on stupid linguistics anyway, that as if just saying the word God, that everyone means the same thing. No, they don't. I mean, I might say, there's one God and he's Satan. There's one God, but it's Lucifer. Well, we're not going to do ecumenical dialogue based on the fact that we both believe in one God. That's just retarded.